everyone. Welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. My name is Aaron Freeman. I'm with FalcFans.com. I am joined by my co-host and partner, Scott Karasik, over at the Falcoholic. We are back this week to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. We will be doing a thing different this week than we've normally done. I don't think we've ever done this before in the 3 years that we've done this show.
Nope.
We'll be doing a mock draft of the first 17 picks. We'll be picking the first round through the Falcons selection at pick number 17, how we think the draft will go. I'm sure we will have different opinions by the time we actually get to the draft because it's always a fluid thing and you rethink things and you think this one time. But we will do that tonight. That will be the crux of our show. And then at the end, we will answer all you guys' mailbag questions. And, that's it. So this idea for doing the mock draft came from Evan Birchfield, who is a regular watcher or listener or whatever he does of this show. I think Evan's probably asked a question for the mailbag probably every show that we've done, at least for the last year, if not maybe the last two. So he is one of our loyal listeners, and he's suggested us doing a mock draft. And because he's such a loyal listener and is always praising of us on the show, we thought we would listen to him. And, we don't have great ideas for how to fill this airtime leading up to the draft. So we said, hey, that's a pretty good idea. All right. So, Scott, how do you want to do this? You want to go back and forth and, for each pick?
I think that works. One thing I would say is I think we should arrive at a consensus and go down the whole thing that way.
Okay.
I think that'd be a better way to do it.
All right. Maybe we should have discussed this before we got on air.
We probably should have, because I don't feel like, hey, this is my pick, hey, this is your pick. Because by the time we get to pick 10, we've got completely different boards.
Okay. Well, we can talk about them. I kind of did this mock earlier today just as this is what I felt in the moment. So we can certainly talk about each pick and then sort of talk about how we think it's going to go. All right. Well, we'll figure it out, I guess, guys. This is making for a great show so far. So, let's jump right into it. I guess I'll give who I think the first pick will be, and then we can discuss it if you want to give your pick or whatever, if it's different. I don't know who Scott's gonna pick. He's seen my picks. I posted in the doc we share. But the Titans are picking number 1. I think they're going to take Laramie Tunsil. I do think there's a chance they take Jalen Ramsey, but I do feel like at the end of the day, they'll probably wind up taking Laramie Tunsil.
So when I look at a team, I look, especially at the number 1 overall pick, I always look at the depth chart and see what their team looks like right now. And when you're looking at the number 1 pick, you have to look at the premier value positions: quarterback, left tackle, top pass rusher, starting left cornerback, number 1 wide receiver, those kind of positions. And I look at it and I go, all right, well, they got Marcus Mariota. That's their franchise, no matter what. Taylor Lewan could be a left tackle long-term, but I don't honestly love his fit there. I think his long-term fit should be right tackle. But I'll get back to that in a second. Pass rusher, they got Derek Morgan and Brian Orakpo on the roster. That should be a set position. And they've got interior guys like Jarrell Casey and Carl Klug who do a good job. So that's not a great fit. Left corner, they don't have that at all. However, I don't think Jalen Ramsey is a good left corner, and I don't think Vernon Hargreaves is good enough to go number 1 overall. So when you're looking at the value of the draft versus what they've got and what they need, the one guy that really stands out is Laramie Tunsil. If I'm the Titans, I don't overthink it. I say, hey, I just brought in Marcus Mariota to be the franchise. I just brought back Byron Bell to be depth. I've got Chance Warmack. I've got Taylor Lewan. I can have them be my right guard, right tackle, and have a power side on that side. I've got Putasi on the at left guard, who's a solid pass blocker, needs some work in the run game. But Tunsil's the same way. Solid pass blocker, needs some work in the run game. So you put Tunsil and Putasi on the left side. You got a good young center in Schwenke. If Putasi starts to suck, you've got Ben Jones, and you can slide in at left guard. You've got good depth along that line. And you've got guys who you say, all right, I've got a good, deep, strong offensive line to protect the franchise. You shore up that line for the next probably 6-7 years if you do that with guys who the oldest ones on that offensive line would be Brian Schwenke, who was drafted in 2013. And he's 25, and he's the oldest guy on that line.
Yeah, all good points. Yeah, and the thing I look at, I think they gave up 54 sacks last year, which was like the most in the NFL. Now, part of that was because Zach Mettenberger can't move. But, when you're looking at Mariota, you want to protect him. And I think, I think Ramsey is a good player. But I think if you're going to take a defensive back number one, which I think I read today hasn't happened since 1956, you have to really like that guy. The reality is the way that the early part of the draft goes is certain positions get, favored, as Scott said. He named those positions. And typically the number one pick is always going to be either a quarterback, a left tackle, or pass rusher. Yep. And, there's some exceptions to that, but by and large, that's sort of the conservative sort of way that teams value the spots. And, obviously we can determine whether that's fair or not. But I think you have to basically say Jalen Ramsey's the best defensive back we've seen in a very long time. He's better than Patrick Peterson. He's better than Champ Bailey to justify taking him number one. So I think at the end of the day, they'll probably take Tunsil, but it wouldn't totally shock me if they took Jalen Ramsey. Wouldn't totally shock me, but it would be certainly a headline grabber on draft night. So, all right, let's move on to the Browns pick. They picked number 2. I guess, Scott, I'll let you go first since I went first last time.
So my rule is if you're picking in the top 5, and you don't have any semblance of a starting quarterback, you should probably go and get yourself a starting quarterback. Now, the Titans, they've got Mariota. The Chargers, who pick at 3, have Phillip Rivers. The Cowboys have Tony Romo. And the Jaguars have Blake Bortles. The Browns, however, are the Browns and don't have anybody worth a shit. So if I'm the Browns, I look at 2 guys. I look at Jared Goff and I look at Carson Wentz. And I put the time into Paxton Lynch just to see if I like him. Because if you like him better, if you like what he can do, if Hugh Jackson says, this is the guy that I can build my offense around, you just make your head coach happy. And say, you know what, Hugh Jackson, if you want to build your offense around this guy, we'll build our offense around this guy. Not a problem. So when I look at Carson Wentz and when I look at Jared Goff, I see 2 completely different players. I see a guy who's like a Blake Bortles type clone in Carson Wentz, or I see a guy who's like a Drew Brees with a couple of inches on him and like not as good pocket presence in Carson Wentz or in Jared Goff. Like a poor man's Drew Brees versus a poor man's Blake Bortles, Ben Roethlisberger type. And I'm one of those guys that I think Blake Bortles is on his way to being a really good quarterback in the NFL. So personally, if I had to pick, if I'm Hugh Jackson, unless I just fall in love with Paxton Lynch, I'm going Carson Wentz all day, every day. I think that he's the best fit for the offense. I think he'd fit in very well with the receivers they have there. I think if Josh Gordon comes back and really does come back and comes back as Josh Gordon that we all know, and I wouldn't say love, but the one that we all know, he'll be a great pick. And then their second-round pick they can use on a receiver. And, yeah, it's a little bit of a weak class, but if they can luck out and get a Corey Coleman or a Tyler Boyd type right at the top of the second round, they'll be fine.
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting pick because I've heard rumors and whispers that Hugh Jackson is all in on RG3, and the GM, the guy who's running the show down there, Sashi Brown, is not. And I'm fairly confident that the Browns are going to take a quarterback. If they don't take him at this spot, they will get him at the top of round 2 because they hold the first pick in round 2. So I think, one of the issues that they're going to have to deal with is, and I'm wondering if there's a little bit of push and pull in that organization still. They're not all on the same page. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But I think they're still going to take Carson Wentz. But I do think that if they are on the same page, one of the reasons why they signed RG3, and his contract really is only kind of a 1-year deal, the way it's sort of structured. It's basically like, he might start for us this year, and we'll see what happens next year. But it's one of those things where I think RG3 gives them a reason to trade back. If they feel like, if Hugh Jackson likes Cardale Jones or Connor Cook or Paxton Lynch or whoever, and someone wants to come up and get Carson Wentz, then they'll be like, yeah, we'll take, a first-round pick next year and a bunch of picks to move back. We'll go with RG3 and we'll still get the guy we want. So I do think if the Browns are in that sort of mindset and they can get somebody like the Rams or the 49ers or whomever to move up to get Carson Wentz, I think, people dogging the Browns for, being this horribly run organization might have to rethink it. Now, obviously, we'll have to see how it ends up working out. And we could be saying the same thing again, 2-3 years from now. But, I do think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch on draft day. But I'm with you. I think Carson Wentz is the pick as of right now. But I do think this pick is up for trade. But, yeah. All right. Next pick is the San Diego Chargers. And the guy I have going here is Jalen Ramsey. And I feel really confident that Tunsil, Wentz, and Ramsey are going to be the first 3 picks in this draft. I don't know exactly what order they'll be in. But I feel like if, for whatever reason, the Browns passed on Wentz at 2, I think the Chargers would sprint to the draft board and say, we'll take him because, Phillip Rivers might be gone next year. They can basically dump Phillip Rivers after the season at any point they want to. If they feel so inclined, so they could draft Wentz and then trade Phillip Rivers, kind of like how they did with Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers when he first came into the league. But I think they're going to take Jalen Ramsey at this pick. They need to replace Eric Weddle in the secondary, and Jalen Ramsey probably will be nickel corner / free safety in their scheme, since Jason Verrett is a really underrated and really good cornerback, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing him lock up with Julio Jones this year. I think that's going to be one of the more fun matchups we'll get to see this year. So, yeah, Jalen Ramsey, I think, is going to be this pick.
This is where I'm really going to disagree with you. The Chargers went out this offseason. I know Dwight Lowery's not amazing, but they went out and got Dwight Lowery for free safety. They went out and got Casey Hayward to play nickel back. So they don't really need a nickel back because Hayward's one of the better ones out there. So when I'm looking at their roster right now, I'm seeing a hole at strong safety because I don't think Jaleel Adai is really that good. But I don't think Ramsey should play strong safety either. And then I look at their left defensive end, and I see Darius Philon, who's okay. He's bleh. Then I see a couple guys sitting there on the board right near the top, like DeForest Buckner, who would be a great fit in that defense. who could open up things for Atauchu and Ingram behind him, coming off the edge, who could give them someone across from Leggett who is actually someone who can eat blockers and someone who can force things on the edge. And basically, he's a better Eric Armstead. Well, Eric Armstead went in the middle of the first round last year in a much, much stronger draft. This year, the draft's really weak comparatively. And, I mean, if Buckner went number 3 overall, started right away at left end for them, at that strong side end, it wouldn't shock me. I think it'd be a brilliant move. And I think their pass rush set, when you get the third down, Leggett, Buckner, Atauchu, and Ingram coming off the line would be a pretty good group. So overall, if I had to go with anybody there, it'd be DeForest Buckner. I think he'd be a guy that could help really solidify that front seven for them.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that happening. It's certainly a big need for them to get. And I do think Buckner is going to be a really good player. I think he's going to, I think his ceiling is Calais Campbell. And I feel fairly confident. He may not reach that ceiling, but he'll get pretty close. I think he's going to be a very good NFL player. He's one of my favorite prospects in this draft. So that makes sense to me.
I don't know if he's as athletic as Campbell is, though. I mean, Campbell's kind of a freak athlete for his size. And coming off the edge, Campbell can turn the edge pretty quickly. I think his best case is probably closer to Mo Wilkerson, a little more length. That's what I see on film, at least.
Okay.
But again, if your best case is Mo Wilkerson, you're 60% of Mo Wilkerson. You get 6 sacks a year. You're a great run defender. You eat a lot of double teams. If you're the Chargers at number 3 and he eats a lot of double teams and allows Atauchu to reach his potential and Ingram to reach his potential, and those guys can be 10-sack guys, that's when you're like, all right, well, this pick ends up being worth it because it's given us a total of 10 sacks a year, because it's given us that interior pressure that we needed to force those exterior sacks.
Okay. All right. Next pick is the Cowboys. So I'll let you start us off with this one, Scott.
So who are we assuming at 3?
Let's go with Buckner, I guess.
All right, so we're assuming Tunsil, Wentz.
Well, I mean, what's stopping you from just going with your picks?
I'll just go with my picks then.
Yeah,
assuming Tunsil, Wentz, and Buckner are the top 3. I've got the Cowboys going with Jalen Ramsey.
Okay.
Because at free safety, they have Byron Jones. At strong safety, they got Barry Church. However, I think the long term for them, for Byron Jones, the plan is more as a strong safety than as a free safety.
Okay.
Because they run that Marinelli variation on Kiffin's Tampa 2, Church basically just drops back and plays strong safety, and he doesn't have that kind of range. Jones does. Ramsey does. And then in nickel, you bring Church in as that strong safety, and you've really got something going there. And yeah, they've got Skandrick and Claiborne and Brandon Carr and all the other guys. You could also have Church drop down in the nickel. I think it allows them to play a little bit more of a 3-3-5 when they do have to go to a nickel, or a 4-2-5 when they do have to go to the nickel, where it doesn't matter which safety is which, because each one can also play nickel. And I think that helps them a lot. So I think Jalen Ramsey would be a perfect fit for their defense, a perfect fit for their team. They need a little bit of attitude back there. And I think Marinelli would just fall in love with him.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. If Ramsey's there, then they've had a lot of issues in that secondary the last couple of years. So getting a player like Ramsey to solidify one of those spots, you get four guys on the field: Carr, Scandrick, and Jones and Ramsey, and you get a lot. You basically have four corners on the field, so you should be able to match up with pretty much any team that you face.
Exactly. Now, I will say the reason why I don't go defensive end Joey Bosa here is because they just took Randy Gregory last year, and then the year before they took DeMarcus Lawrence. So I'm a big believer in you can't have too many pass rushers, but I'm also a big believer in the number 4 overall pick needs to be a guy that starts and plays probably at least 70% of the snaps for you first year.
Well, the guy I had the Cowboys going with, I had Miles Jack. I think some of their moves they've made on the defensive line this offseason, getting Cedric Thornton, getting Benson Mayowa, I think is sort of their hedge, which will sort of free them up to take a linebacker like Miles Jack. It seems like Miles Jack is the type, like people that watch this show on a regular basis know I think Miles Jack is the greatest thing that ever happened, to humanity since, the dawn of time. And I do feel like he's the type of guy that Jerry Jones would typically fall in love with, given what he can do. They've had injury issues with Sean Lee. Rolando McClain, I think, is working on a one-year deal. Their other linebackers are like Anthony Hitchens, who's okay, but he's really more of a quality backup than a lockdown starter. And Jack, you can plug and play with him at that strong side spot. You can play him, you can shuffle around your linebacker core to deal with him and make him the centerpiece of your defense. I do think there's a chance that they'll go Bosa, just because I think you can plug him into that Greg Hardy role, where he plays, outside on base downs and then inside on passing downs. But I do feel like they just got Cedric Thornton, and he can, he's not a great pass rusher, but he can give you something on the interior pass rush. So, I feel like they're okay. They can get by with what they have at defensive line without going Bosa at this pick. So Miles Jack is, I think, the Cowboys pick with this.
I mean, in your situation, they don't have Ramsey available, so it does make sense. The only other dark horse that I have there would be DeForest Buckner. They've shown a lot of interest in him. And back when they had, what's his name? Played for the Redskins this past year. Hatcher. Yeah, back when they had Hatcher, I feel like Buckner could emulate that role. Be a better version, obviously, but I feel like he could emulate that role and be that 3 technique, good run stuffer, eat double teams. Again, same kind of stuff. I see him as a space eater who will get you 6 sacks by collapsing the pocket and cleaning up more than anything else.
Yeah. Now, next pick is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And as I said, I thought the first 3 picks in this draft would be Tunsil, Wentz, and Ramsey in some order. I feel like whoever the Cowboys, if that happens, I feel like if the Cowboys take Bosa, then Jaguars are taking Miles Jack. If the Cowboys take Jack, then I think they're going to take Bosa. I know they just spent a ton of money on Malik Jackson. I know they spent a ton of money on Jared Odrick last year. I know they used the number 1 pick on Dante Fowler last year. But everything I've heard about how Jacksonville plans on using Fowler is they're not going to necessarily, throw him out there as an every down player right away. I think they're going to try to use him more as a situational guy. And if you can get a guy like Bosa out there on the edge to go with Jackson and Odrick, and basically I think they would envision Bosa, you put Fowler and Bosa at 2 of the end spots, and then put Odrick and Jackson on the interior, and you can flip Odrick and Bosa, put Bosa inside, and those are going to be your 4 primary pass rushers on nickel downs, and it's a nickel league where I think the numbers were like 63% of the snaps last year were out of the nickel. I think I saw that the other day. So, Bosa brings a lot of value there. I don't ever see Bosa being this sort of 10-sack guy on an annual basis. But, with those other 3 guys, I think they can put a lot of heat on Andrew Luck for the next, 5 or 10 years moving forward. So
That'd be a scary team. You'd have Malik Jackson, Tyson Lulu, Roy Miller, and say Jared Odrick is or Bosa as your base. Then your pass rush set would be Fowler, like Chris Smith, and Derek Marks, and then you'd have guys trying to fight for that fourth spot in that pass rush set. So it'd be pretty scary. Let's see. Who we at now? The Jaguars. All right, so I've got Tunsil, Wentz, Buckner, Ramsey all going off the board.
Mm-hmm.
That first pick for the Jaguars, if he's there, they're going to trip over themselves, probably have a guy break his nose landing on that front step of the podium so hard, going up there for Miles Jack. Like, it's not even a question. Miles Jack at number 5 overall, if he's there, is the pick. He's a huge upgrade over Posluszny. They can move Posluszny over to strong side linebacker. Hell, they can move Telvin Smith to strong safety if they really wanted to. He's got that kind of range. And have a really good, basically base defense. And then on passing downs, you have Telvin Smith and Miles Jack in the middle at that second level of defense, covering all your pass plays. You're good to go. There's no issues at all in that defense. I mean, they've spent so much money this offseason because they didn't have the talent really in the first place. The only other spot I could see them going is someone like Vernon Hargreaves. I just really like him. I think he's a good player. I think he's not your ideal athlete for the position, but when it comes to cornerback, for whatever reason, that's the one position that it seems that the Seattle, Jacksonville, Atlanta scheme is basically like, oh yeah, no big deal if you're a slow corner, we'll make it work. Every other position you gotta be fast as hell. Corner, you can be a little slow.
Yeah. Okay. Let's next pick is the Ravens. They pick number 6. Scott, start us off.
All right, so you got Tunsil, you got Wentz, you got Buckner, Ramsey, Jack. They're all off the board. First thought goes right to Joey Bosa. And you start thinking, you know what, that makes a lot of sense, except for the fact that Bosa doesn't really fit a 3-4. I like him. I think he's a really good football player. But Bosa in a 3-4 is almost puke-worthy in terms of his fit. It just doesn't make any real sense. So that leaves me looking at the Baltimore secondary, one of the worst in the NFL. They go out, they get Eric Weddle. That's great. Strong safety still a mess. I think Ladarius Webb is mediocre. They need pass rushers on the outside. They need pass rushers in order to complement Suggs and Dumerville. They just lost their starting strong side linebacker who came to Atlanta to be a backup in Courtney Upshaw. So they really need someone who can get in there, attack the quarterback from an edge role more than anything else. I think we're going to see a surprise early in the draft. And Aaron's going to hate me for saying this because it's way too high for the value. I honestly think it's a little too high for the value as it is. But if anybody makes it work, it's Dean Pease, it's John Harbaugh. Looking at this guy going, he's an athlete. We can teach him how to play the position. We know he can set the edge. And if we give him a certain position, he'll be fine. I think Leonard Floyd, number 6 overall.
All right. I'm not laughing at that. I'm just, yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Again, if there's a team that has that kind of arrogance about him, who's like, you know what, we can take a guy, we can mold him into a player that we know he can be, I think it's Baltimore. And as crazy as it sounds, Floyd going number 6 overall does just kind of feel right.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the one guy you had in your top five that hasn't been picked yet, and I'm gonna go with DeForest Buckner. I know they picked up Carl Davis last year. I know they have Brandon Williams and Timmy Jernigan. Davis did some good things for them, but he's no Buckner. And really, Jernigan's a good player, but I think they need to. Yeah, he's fine. Like I'm not gonna say a bad thing about Timmy Jernigan. So I think Buckner is that sort of difference maker. He's not the edge guy that they kind of are looking for, but I think they're going to be kind of caught in the wind, and I think they'll probably come in the second round and try to get somebody at the top of round two. I do think the thing you mentioned that I do kind of agree with. I think they could go cornerback here if they really do like Vernon Hargreaves. I could see them taking him at this point. I know they're going to move Webb to free safety. Weddle, I think, is going to play strong safety. They already have Jimmy Smith at one spot. They have like a butt ton of safeties on the roster. They just don't have any good cornerbacks other than Jimmy Smith. So I think if they really like Hargreaves, they could take him. Because Buckner, I'm a big fan of Buckner, but he's not really a sexy pick.
Actually, you know what? I'm changing my pick to Hargreaves. It just feels right.
Okay. Yeah, it's just one of those things where, I think Hargreaves tested in the 98th percentile with Spark. So, which really surprised me how well he tested at the combine. He didn't run a super fast 40, but, he really did a great job with the other things, especially considering that he's not the world's biggest corner. So I could definitely see them looking at him. And I know the last time they had a top 10 pick was Terrell Suggs, and I think before that was Dwayne Starks, and I think they took Chris McAllister in the top 10. So they're definitely a team that has had success taking cornerbacks really high in the draft in past years. So I could definitely see Hargreaves at this spot. All right, the next pick is the 49ers, and I feel like all this drama with Colin Kaepernick kind of signals where they're supposed to go. They're going to take a quarterback, and unless you think, whoever you think the number 2 quarterback is going to be their pick, and I think it's going to be Jared Goff. I see him as a guy that I think can work in Chip Kelly's offense, being that sort of quick, decisive sort of, people compare him to Matt Ryan, and I understand why people make that comparison. I don't think Jared Goff is nearly as good as what Matt Ryan was coming out. But then again, Matt Ryan wasn't as highly touted as probably people remember coming out. It was very divisive on how good he was back in 2008. But I do think Goff is going to be the pick for the 49ers. They need a quarterback. It's very clear that Kaepernick is not a long-term answer, even if they do figure out some way to keep him, barring him just really tearing it up this year. They need to start planning for the future, and I think Goff makes perfect sense here.
I mean, that's exactly what I'm thinking. They're getting rid of Kaepernick one way or another, so you got to replace him. The old rule in the NFL is if you don't have a quarterback, get one, and hopefully it's a good one. And Jared Goff's the guy. Like, that's the guy. So.
Yep. All right, the Eagles pick is going to be interesting. Start us off, Scott. They pick 8.
This is about as telegraphed as a Babe Ruth home run. We know exactly what's going to happen. They're calling their shot. They traded away Matthews. They didn't trade away Matthews. They're probably going to trade away Matthews. They've got Sproles, who's a good change of pace. They got Barner, who bleh. They got nobody else who's really worth a damn. They could go quarterback. They could take Paxton Lynch here. They do have Paxton Lynch in their sights. But I think they're going to do something stupid, which will end up working out for them and taking a running back for Doug Peterson. He's from the Andy Reid school of run your running back into the ground and pray the rest of the offense works behind it. And I hope I've got 2 to 3 good running backs that I can run into the ground and rotate them and keep them all fresh. So I think if you I think if it's anybody but Ezekiel Elliott here, it's just because they fell in love with quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you on Elliott. I look at the Eagles roster and I don't see, other than maybe quarterback, I don't see a glaring hole on their team. They have some areas that they need to improve, certainly, but there isn't like, there's just a glaring spot on their roster that they just don't have anybody who's at least quasi-competent.
I'm just looking through their offense. Left guard, awful. Fullback, awful. Neither one of those is a first-round pick. In a 4-3, Barwin and Curry at left end, Graham, Fletcher Cox, Benny Logan. I mean, they're good there. They're linebackers. Michael Kendricks, Jordan Hicks, Nigel Bradham. Those guys are all good. I mean, cornerback, you got Rowe, you got Kelvin. I mean, maybe a corner, but if Hargreaves is off the board, then, I don't really see a need for safety either. I'm with you. Like, go with the best player that you can get at that situation, and that's a running back, and that's Ezekiel Elliott. Get you a Todd Gurley type. Only one who can actually pass, block, and catch at this point in his career.
Yeah. All right, the next pick is the Buccaneers pick, and I'll say this: that these 8 guys that I had going before, like I'm really confident as much as you ever can be with the draft. That those 8 guys are probably going to be at least 7 of the first 8 picks in the draft. But really, at this Bucs pick is the first point in the draft where I don't really know what's going to happen. So I'm going to go with Hargreaves, just because I feel like they signed Britt Grimes. They have Werner, so they don't have a glaring need at corner, but Werner's contract is kind of structured where they can kind of get out of it. I know they brought in the Titans' old DB coach, so they probably like Werner probably more than Lovie Smith did. And obviously they have the Mike Smith Grimes connection, but Grimes is 33 now, mm-hmm. So you can only really expect him to maybe have one more good year left in him. Maybe 2.
He was awful last year.
Yeah, I think he'll have a better season this year, just because he won't shadow number ones. He'll play more like what he did in Atlanta, and we know he was good then. So I think he'll be better. I don't think he'll be what he was, in 4 or 5 years ago, but he'll improve. But I think you put Hargreaves because, if you like Vernon Hargreaves, I think there's a little, going back to 4 or 5 years ago to Brent Grimes when he was at his peak, there's a lot of that in him. Plus, I think Hargreaves is a little bit more, or not a little bit, a lot more physical than Grimes is. And even though he's kind of on the small side, if you're the Bucs, you have to figure out how to stop Julio Jones. Like, the Bucs have a lot of issues, but right now on their defense, they need a pass rush, and they need to stop Julio Jones, and they need to stop Kelvin Benjamin. And those are the main issues that they have to deal with defensively. And I think taking a cornerback right here is an investment to try to deal with Julio Jones for the future. We'll see if Hargreaves can handle that responsibility. But if anybody in this draft class can, I would probably put my money on Hargreaves. So it'll be interesting to see those battles in the future.
See, in my situation, Hargreaves goes to the Ravens. So the Buccaneers get one guy sitting there falling into their lap who, if you're going to replace somebody on that defense, I don't look at their corners. I think Grimes is solid. I think Werner's solid. I think Mike Smith's going to fall in love with Jonathan Banks as a right corner as well. So the real need that I see there comes from left defensive end, William Golston. He's garbage. In my situation, they have Joey Bosa falling right into their lap. Again, they're going to fall all over themselves. And they're going to go take Bosa. They're going to plug him in. He's going to start at left end. They're going to have Ayers and Jacquez Smith at right end. They'll rotate George Johnson. They can move Golston inside if they really want to. Probably where he fits better too. And be good. And I would be hating that pick because that means on pass rush downs it's probably going to be Bosa, Johnson, like Golston, and Jacquez Smith, and it's going to be frustrating to watch.
Yeah, I wouldn't look forward to that. So you're right there. All right, next up is the Giants pick. Start us off, Scott.
So the Giants are one of those teams that you're like, where the hell do they go? They went out and they get Damon Harrison in free agency. They've already got Lewis Nix that they claimed off waivers from Houston. So nose tackle seems fine. They got Jonathan Hankins and Jay Bromley that they rotate out at the 3 tech. So that seems fine. They go out and they get Olivier Vernon. They re-sign Jason Pierre-Paul. They've got Owa Odigizua. They don't really need a defensive end. So defensive line's going to be out. So that's the strength of the class right there that they're not even going to be looking at. At linebacker, they really, really, really need a linebacker. So someone like Darren Lee would make sense. But do you take a weak side linebacker top 10 overall? I don't. And I don't think he's a good fit for middle linebacker in their scheme. So then you look at their secondary and you're like, all right, well, Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie, Janoris Jenkins, Cooper Taylor kind of sucks, but you're not taking a guy at strong safety that high in this class. Landon Collins, they got him. He's solid. All right, well, defense is out. Let's look at offense. John Jerry's garbage. There's no guards worth it. Is there a tackle worth a damn that you can move Eric Flowers over to right tackle? And that's the one spot that I kind of gravitate towards every single time I look at the Giants roster. Left tackle Eric Flowers sucks as a left tackle. He's a right tackle. He played right tackle in college. He needs to move back. Justin Pugh should stay at left guard. Rich Berg at center. Johnson's a solid right guard. So move Flowers back to the right tackle next to John Jerry. Plug in Ronnie Stanley, number 10 overall. Left tackle from Notre Dame. Protect the blind side for years to come with the Giants. And let Manning have a good couple of years left to where he's not getting scraped up off the turf.
Yeah. When I've been mocking this pick the last couple of weeks, it's basically been taking an offensive tackle. I've had them take Conklin just because I think you look at some of their picks the last couple of years in the first round with Pugh and Eric Flowers, it seems like they want those sort of more physical power. Well, I wouldn't say Justin Pugh's a power guy, but he's more of a toughness guy than sort of – I don't really see Stanley as that type of guy who's going to get after in the run game. So, but I wanted to switch it up because that would, they could, maybe they look at the Cowboys and say, hey, they've used all these picks on offensive linemen in the first round. Maybe we should copy that. But it would be the third first-round pick they've used on a offensive lineman in 4 years? And I just don't see them going that direction. I do think they go – I think there's no chance they're going to take a linebacker. They, as an organization, do not value the linebacker position.
Not at all.
I think they've drafted one linebacker in the top 4 rounds in like the last 10 years or something like that.
Yep. They don't give a damn about linebackers. Their view is we can throw someone out there and be good to go.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. And they just signed Keenan Robinson.
Yeah. They might take a guy like in the 3rd or 4th round. I could see that happening, but they're not going to take. That would be the biggest shock if the draft.
They're who I think takes Deion Jones in the 3rd round ahead of the Falcons.
Yeah, that makes
a team.
So I have them taking Sheldon Rankins with this pick because even though they've invested a lot in their defense and their defensive line this offseason, I think, you look at Snacks Harrison, he's basically a 2-down player. So they need another guy to provide that interior pass rush. And they could probably kick in Diggy inside maybe to try to get their sort of NASCAR package. But I look at it, Hankins is a free agent next year. And given all the money they gave Vernon, given all the money they gave Jenkins, I don't think they'll be in a position where they can really justify giving him a market value contract. And I don't feel like they think Jay Bromley is ready to step up and replace him. So I feel like they put Rankins out there. They use him as a situational guy this year, and then they let Hankins walk, and then Rankins just immediately steps into that spot in 2017, and they're ready to go. And everybody knows how much the Giants value pass rush, and I think Rankins is a really good pass rusher, has the potential to be so. I think, I'm trying to remember if, they passed on Aaron Donald 3 years. Was that the Justin Pugh draft? I think they passed on Aaron Donald in that.
Not Pugh. Pugh went 19. Donald went like 11.
Okay. All right. You're probably right. Okay. Yeah, you're right. So, yeah, I just feel like they're going to look at Rankins and like, we're going to get our own version of Aaron Donald. He's not as good as Aaron Donald, but, he's like maybe 2 steps below, which is a really good player in his own regard. So I think that's who they're going to go with at this point. All right. The next pick is the Chicago Bears, and they got to take a left tackle. They signed Bobby Massey. He's going to play right tackle. They're going to move Kyle Long back to right guard. Right now, their left tackle, I think, is Charles Molino. Yeah, they got to take a left tackle here. I think they take Ronnie Stanley here. He went to Notre Dame. He's like literally from right down the road. They pick him up. They're good to go. It's kind of a no-brainer pick if he's still on the board.
I'm agreeing that they should take a left tackle. Just looking at their defense, looking at the strength of the class, I mean, unless they want to replace Will Sutton, I don't really see anybody worth taking in that front 7. In the secondary, I can't see him taking a guy in the first round. As much as I like Mackenzie Alexander, I don't think he's going to fit with them. They get Kevin White back from injury this year, so that's like getting 2 first-round picks in the same year. Bobby Massey, love the guy. Play him at right tackle, Long at right guard, Grossu at center. That's a scary right side of the line. Slauson's an old, reliable guy like Justin Blaylock was for the Falcons. So at this point, they do need a left tackle who they can plug in, kind of feed to the Wolves a little bit, and be okay with it. I don't think Stanley's ideal for them. I think if they were going to get someone, it'd be someone like Taylor Decker. He's a big, athletic guy. Reminds me a little bit of Ryan Schrader in terms of his athleticism. The Falcons are just lucky enough to have someone like Jake Matthews on the other side of the field so that they can put Schrader on the right side. But Schrader just got the athleticism of an NFL left tackle. Big, good feet, uses hands well, just not a good run blocker at all. And I feel like if you're the Bears, you accept that because you're like, you know what, we just got to keep Cutler standing upright. We can run to the right side all day. Let's just keep Cutler standing upright and we'll be fine. So I think you go Taylor Decker there. It's probably a little early, but for a premium position like left tackle, if you don't have a good one, you've got to keep your franchise quarterback standing up. And when you've got a young group like Grossu, who was drafted in 15, Long was drafted in 13, Bobby Massey was drafted in 12. Those guys on the right side, Slauson's only 30, so he's not that old. And then you'd have a 22-year-old or 21-year-old Taylor Decker at left tackle. You could let that line grow up together and do a great job, doing very well together.
Okay. All right. This is going to be your favorite pick, Scott. Don't purposely bomb it because you hate this team so much. But the next pick is the New Orleans Saints at pick number 12. Who you got?
The Saints. My least favorite team ever. So looking over their roster, I think tackle they've got pretty much set up. They've got Armstead and Pete. They need guards. They need receivers. Well, Snead's okay. Cooks is good. They've got tight ends they like. They've got running backs they like. They've got a quarterback. Let's look at their shitty defense. They're probably going to start Danilo O'Ree because they're dumb. They're probably going to have James Laurinaitis start over Stephon Anthony because they're super dumb. Cameron Jordan's probably going to play. Yeah, Cameron Jordan, looks like Tyler Davidson or Nick Fairley. Probably going to be Nick Fairley at the 3 technique. Bobby Richardson as the weak side defensive end. I hate doing this because I know that it's going to be their like biggest need and their biggest fit, but they need a cornerback more than anything else. Keenan Lewis is good, but he's always injured. Delvin Breaux's a walking penalty waiting to happen once teams actually start looking at him. PJ Williams is garbage. Damian Swan is garbage. So they need a guy who will actually fit into Dennis Allen's defense. And I think when you're sitting there looking at these corners in this draft, Mackenzie Alexander is a guy that just fits. He really does fit that defense well. So if I'm the Saints, that's the guy I look right at. I go Mackenzie Alexander, and I don't look back. I have a number 1 corner. I can play the guy who played his entire career up until getting to New Orleans at right corner, back at right corner, and Keenan Lewis, and then just have a decent overall team. But yeah, I made a good pick for New Orleans beyond my better judgment.
Okay. Now, you're going to hate my pick because you love this guy.
But I'm going to get Shaq Lawson.
Yeah. Thanks for tipping my picks now. No.
I haven't even looked at it.
It's one of those things where I look at their they have to go defense with this pick. Like, unless they really fall in love with one of these offensive linemen, they're going to move Pete to guard.
Or unless they go quarterback. That's like the one position, like, I could see them taking a quarterback, like Paxton Lynch, and being like, hey, you're going to sit for 3 years behind Drew Brees until his contract's up.
Okay. That would be an interesting pick. Yeah, great. If the Saints do that, then great. I'll take that. But I look at him, and I think they're, as I talked about earlier with another team, I can't remember who. Oh, the Jaguars. It's really about who are the 4 pass rushers you're putting on the field on nickel downs. And I think they're moving Anthony to strong side linebacker so they can start Laurinaitis. And I think that's probably going to put Kakaha as a situational pass rusher, which was basically what he was at Washington. And he's fine in that role. So I think you throw him out there on nickel situations at 1 in spot. Jordan moves inside from his DE spot. They just signed Nick Fairley. He can play it beside him. And it's really that other defensive end spot that they're sort of missing. Bobby Richardson isn't that guy. They played him last year because they didn't have a better option.
I think that's where Davis Tull comes in. I think you've got Davis Tull. I think Jordan plays left end and then moves inside on passing downs. I think Kakaha plays right end no matter what happens. I think Jenkins and Fairley alternate at nose tackle. And then Fairley plays the 3 technique and base downs. And Tyler Davidson gets snaps in there. I think their defensive line right now doesn't absolutely need a pass rusher in the first round.
Okay. All right. I don't quite agree. I think they need another pass rusher. They need another guy that provides heat. I think Shaq Lawson makes too much sense for them. They like Delvin Breaux a lot more than I certainly do. And they have Kyle Wilson. Keenan Lewis is probably fine for another year. They used the 3rd round pick on PJ Williams last year. So, it's one of those things where Davis Tull missed his rookie year. He was a 5th round pick. I don't think he was that good. I think the only reason he got drafted in the 5th round is because he tested out the wazoo. But I think on the field, he looked more like a 7th round talent to me. So I feel like if you can go from Davis Tull or Philip Hunt, who I think would probably be the guy that they would in that role. And Philip Hunt is an underrated pass rusher. I will say that. To Shaq Lawson, that's a pretty big upgrade. So it makes sense, at least from the Saints' perspective. I would hate the pick, obviously, because it makes the Saints better. But it makes too much sense from my perspective for them to pass up on another edge rusher at that spot. All right. So the next pick is the Miami Dolphins. I feel like, they have two glaring holes on their roster: interior offensive line and cornerback. And, if they could use every single pick in this draft on just alternating those spots, that would be a good move for their team. But I think there's no interior offensive lineman that you would take this high unless, basically. So I think they take whoever's the best cornerback. They're hoping Hargreaves falls to this spot, but I don't think he will. And I think they go Eli Apple. He fits that Vance Joseph, who comes from Cincinnati, who likes those big, long press corners. Apple has his detractors. I think he's talented. I think, you can talk yourself into his upside. And I think, you can stick him across from Byron Maxwell, and, eventually he'll develop into the number one guy there. So it makes sense from my perspective. So Eli Apple is who I have the Dolphins taking.
So I look at the Dolphins and I see offensive linemen that are pretty bleh. I mean, they got Jawan James, who's really good. I do think Brandon Albert moves inside to guard because they brought in Jermon Bushrod. Bushrod's a bench guy. I do think their offensive line's a little better, at least, than it was a couple years ago. And I don't know. I keep looking in their backfield, and I see running back is just terrible. But there's not anybody at running back worth taking. Not in the first round outside of Ezekiel Elliott. And then I look at their safeties, and I look at the corners. I mean, yeah, you got Rashad Jones, but Abdul Qudus is bleh. And then Byron Maxwell's good, and Jamar Taylor's good. I can't see him taking a first-round cornerback after trading for Byron Maxwell. So I'm left to believe that they're going linebacker, they're going wide receiver, they're going to do something crazy that may not make sense. And I think that a nose tackle out of all the spots really is what they're going to do. If we're looking at all the different things, Sheldon Rankins in my draft hasn't been taken yet. And I think if you're looking for a guy who can get pass rush, he may not be a nose tackle on the base, but you rotate him with Earl Mitchell and Jordan Phillips and Ndamukong Suh on that defensive tackle rotation, and you've got one of the best rotations in the NFL, and you're going to destroy some quarterbacks there. So for the Dolphins there, I'm going to go Sheldon Rankins. Just kind of looking at their roster, looking at the board, seeing how it's stacked out. Just makes the most sense for me.
All right. Next up is my Oakland Raiders.
Your Oakland Raiders.
Number 14.
Raiders.
I think it's your turn to start us off, Scott, so I'll let you go.
All right. I love what the Raiders are doing on defense. Bruce Irvin, Khalil Mack, just a fun pair of players there. Ben Heaney's a good athletic linebacker. Malcolm Smith's a good athletic linebacker. If Mario Edwards was healthy, he'd be a perfect fit long term. I believe they just re-signed Alvin Smith, who's suspended for about the first half of the season. But when he comes back, that'll be pretty scary. The one spot that I look at their roster and I go, that's atrocious, is cornerback. But then I realize that Ken Norton Jr. is their defensive coordinator. And as long as they have these big, long corners like Sean Smith, who's 6'3", like David Amerson, who's 6'1", like DJ Hayden, who's 5'11" and 7/8", they're not going to go corner. There's not really a safety who's worth a pick that high either. So then I go back, all right, offensive side of the ball, what do they need? They have one of the better offensive lines out there, Donald Penn, Gabe Jackson, Rodney Hudson, Kelechi Osemele. tackle Austin Howard. That's like the one spot where you're like, they could go with a right tackle. But I'm not taking a right tackle that high. There's not a tight end worth a pick that high. This is the one team that could basically just say, you know what, let's go best player available. So that's exactly what I'm going to have them do. I'm going to have them go Shaq Lawson, the best player left on the board right now. Have him rotate in with Mario Edwards as that strong side defensive end. You got Edwards, Mack, and Irvin, and Lawson, who are all going to rotate and create havoc. And I think that would be the best possible pick for them, is Shaq Lawson.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you said about the Raiders with their situation, I think the one glaring hole in their roster is a safety. They don't really have a safety on their team right now that can do the things that they want their safeties to do. They lost Charles Woodson. Obviously, he retired. He was their center fielder. He was their Earl Thomas. And they started the season with Nate Allen. I think he got hurt as a strong safety, or he got benched or something. And then they plugged in Taylor Mays, and Taylor Mays did a pretty good job because basically all he was asked to do was cover tight ends. And he I wouldn't say he was great, but he was better than, what Taylor Mays has been. So they need some help there, but there's nobody at this point in the draft that you would take that high unless they really absolutely love, Darian Thompson or Von Bell or Carl Joseph or Keanu Neal or something, which I don't think they do. The interesting thing about the Raiders is, Mario Edwards had a neck injury. He basically played outside linebacker, or he, played defensive end in their base and then kicked inside in their pass rush. So they might be looking for another interior pass rusher. They obviously signed Bruce Irvin, so they don't really need an edge rusher at that spot. But if they don't feel that Edwards if it's a career-threatening neck injury, then they obviously need another interior pass rusher because Justin Ellis and Dan Williams aren't that. But the interesting thing about the Raiders is Austin Howard is coming off of a knee injury or some type of injury, so he's going to miss a chunk of the offseason. Menelik Watson towards Achilles last year, he's going to miss a chunk of the offseason. So right now, their right tackle situation, even though it might be okay by the time we reach week 1, I think they're looking to bolster that spot. And, they did re-sign Donald Penn, but he's like 32 years old. So even though they gave him like a 3-year deal, you can, it's basically a year-to-year sort of contract. So I think they go Jack Conklin with this pick. They could throw Conklin in the mix immediately at right tackle, and he might be able to outright beat Austin Howard or Menelik Watson for that starting right tackle spot for week 1. If he doesn't, then they can just sort of stash him on the roster for a year or two. And whenever the point is that Donald Penn starts to lose it, they can immediately plug him in at left tackle. And he fits that mold as that really tough run blocker. I think with Conklin, I have my concerns about how well he'll hold up in pass protection. But he is a super tough physical guy. And I do think kind of in the same way that Brandon Scherf was last year, he sort of compensates for whatever his pass protecting deficiencies might be with really getting after in the run game. And I think that's sort of what the Raiders want to be. They just want to be this, mash you into the sort of ground team in the trenches. And I think Conklin gives them that. So he's the guy I have them picking at that spot. Okay, next pick is the St. Louis Rams. They are the oddball. They are the wild card in this draft because they have the 43rd and 45th pick, and I feel like they could package this 15th overall pick with those 2 second-round picks and jump into the top 5 and get a quarterback if they feel so inclined. Even though
you mean the Los Angeles Rams?
Yes. Did I say St. Louis?
Yep.
I'm gonna keep doing that. I'm never gonna get used to saying Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Rams. So it's interesting. They keep talking about how they like Case Keenum, and they're basically like their strategy is we just need a guy that's not going to turn the ball over. We're just going to hand the ball off to Todd Gurley, and we're going to play great defense, and we're going to win that way. and you can make a case that Keenum could do that. I do think they secretly want a quarterback. I don't know if they're going to take Paxton Lynch at this spot. I think if they're going to get a quarterback, they're going to jump. They're going to trade up to get him. So I have them going with Ashawn Robinson. I'm not a huge fan of Ashawn Robinson. I think he'll be a solid pro. But similar to the Giants situation, Michael Brockers is a free agent next year, and I think they're going to have to make a hard choice where Aaron Donald's going to be getting paid in like 2 years or something like that. And they're like, well, we're not going to be able to pay Michael Brockers. So let's go ahead and draft his replacement this year. And we'll continue to solidify our defense and keep playing at a high level. And, if they don't take Robinson at this pick, then he's probably going to fall like 15 more spots. So it made sense to me to take Robinson at this spot. So.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of doing that. I'm a fan of picking guys who actually fit where they're supposed to be. If I'm going to do anything, I'm going to end up taking Paxton Lynch. Because, again, you can't honestly look someone in the eye and go, Case Keenum's the guy who's going to start at quarterback in the NFL for 16 games and perform well. No. Paxton Lynch all day for me. If you don't have a quarterback, get one. Don't be stupid.
Okay. Yeah, pretty much no brainer, right?
For me,
right.
Yeah.
Next pick is the Detroit Lions. So start us off, Scott.
Well, they just lost Calvin Johnson and decided to go out and get Jeremy Curley and Marvin Jones to replace that void. That's like putting a Band-Aid over the Exxon Valdez. Just does not work. Exxon Valdez was a big oil leak for those that don't remember that kind of reference. Their offensive line is pretty solid, actually. They could use a right tackle, but you ain't taking a right tackle in the first round in this class. You had a bunch of good left tackles, but no right tackles. They could use someone to go across from Ziggy Ansah. They could use a defensive end. They could use a defensive tackle next to Haloti Ngata. As much as I like Tyron Walker, let's get someone who's a lot better. At linebacker, they got Whitehead, who's solid. They got Levy, who's solid. They need a middle linebacker again. I don't see Darren Lee as a fit for them at middle linebacker. I think their secondary is pretty solid, actually. I mean, I don't like Tavon Wilson, but he's not atrocious. So if I'm looking at their defense, if I'm looking at their team, I'm looking at how they run their team. I look at who their defensive coordinator is, and Terrell Austin. I just kind of see how they've got their team structured. I mean, if I'm going with anybody here, it's going to be Leonard Floyd. This is really where he should be going off the board. Fits in. He'll be able to play in those 3-4 packages and those 4-3 packages. Aaron likes to say, if you don't have one position, you have no positions. But I think Terrell Austin would look at that and go, oh, yeah, he doesn't have one position. He's got 7 positions that I can put him at. And he'll use them effectively. He'll blitz them from all sorts of different angles. He'll play inside. He'll play outside. He'll put his hand in the dirt. He'll use them basically the way that Deion Jordan was supposed to be used. But unlike Deion Jordan, he actually has leg explosion, where Deion Jordan just doesn't.
Okay. Okay. I have the Lions taking an offensive tackle here. I have them taking Taylor Decker.
And moving Reef to right?
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be what they've been saying. They've been sort of being coy with pretty much every beat writer for the Detroit Lions has been saying they're going to get a left tackle and move Reef to right and a guy in free agency. So they're like, okay, I guess they'll wait until the draft. And I think they're in a position where, whether Conklin's there or Taylor Decker's there, I think one of those two guys is definitely going to be there. So I think they'll take that guy. Decker would be an interesting pick because I don't know if he's better than Riley Reef, but I feel like the Lions can't really sort of go into another season with like Michael Ola or whoever the heck their right tackle, Lamar Holmes, I think is going to be competing for that spot. So like they have to do something on that offensive line, that offensive line.
And here's the thing: if he's not better than Riley Reef, that's fine. Riley Reef's a perfectly fine left tackle. You know, he's like a top 15 left tackle. He's not amazing, but he's not going to lose you games either.
That's fair. I mean,
he's basically Sam Baker of 2012, only healthy every year and like competent, a lot more competent in the run game.
That's fair. I think that's a fair comparison. I just, yeah, that's fair. I'm not going to. Yeah. All right. I got nothing else to add.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Baker at his best is Riley Reef at his average.
All right. So here's the pick that you all guys have been waiting in over an hour for. You probably tuned us out and then came back to watch us. But now the Falcons are on the board. And I'll start us off. If the draft went the way I had it, with the first 16 picks going the way they went, if I'm in the Falcons war room, I would want them to trade back at this point because the two guys I really want them to take, Rankins and Lawson, have been long gone for a while. And I just feel like there's nobody really worth this pick that trumps the value of adding a second or third round pick by trading back in the first round and probably still getting an equal talent than you do. But, we're not predicting trades in this. So I feel like this is a point where the Falcons really have no choice but to take Darren Lee. People that follow me on Twitter know that I'm not as big a fan of taking Lee at this spot as the rest of the world seems to be. I think Darren Lee is a fine football player. I don't see him blossoming as a weak side linebacker in our scheme. I think he's much more of a project than people are giving credit for. And I don't see him, Josh Norris at Roto World talks about where a guy wins, and I don't see Lee. I think when you look at where Lee wins, I don't see him as a guy that wins where we want our weak side linebacker to win. But it's one of those things where I do think the Falcons do legitimately like him. I think they'll, if they draft Darren Lee, they'll be like, oh, he's fast and he's physical and he's super athletic and blah, 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 blah. And everybody will be excited. And everybody, oh, he's going to be amazing. And then he could be good. I'm not going to sit here and write him off and say he's going to suck or anything. I just think those first few years in the NFL, he's going to go through some growing pains, and I don't think it's going to be as pretty as people think. But if we do take Darren Lee, I kind of hope that we play him more as a sort of hybrid strong safety. I think if we use him basically the same way that the Raiders used Taylor Mays last year, I think that is better suited to what Lee's strengths are. I don't necessarily know the Falcons will do that, but it's one of those things where, at least from my perspective, I think that would be his best fit in our defense because I think he's more of a chess piece, and I don't think there's really a lot of room to use the weak side linebacker in our scheme as a chess piece. I think there's a lot more room for that at strong safety, particularly if you have a really good free safety. And, we can talk about this later, but that's sort of if you go Lee in round one, I would hope the Falcons would go free safety in round two. But that's me.
See, that's interesting because if I'm going to go Lee, and in this situation, I go Lee in round one, and I play him at weak side linebacker with the intention of him being basically the middle linebacker in nickel sets. So weak side and base, middle linebacker and nickel, with the strong safety moving down to that that linebacker group in the nickel. I think in the second round you got to target a guy like Keanu Neal or Sue Cravens. But I think the weak side linebacker in the scheme, I think there's a lot of stuff that the Jaguars do with Telvin Smith that the Falcons just couldn't do with Justin Durant last year, where if you had a guy like Darren Lee, who is that safety linebacker build hybrid in terms of athleticism, you could do those things that they do with Telvin Smith in the scheme in Jacksonville that they do all the time with KJ Wright in Seattle. And I think you could have a guy who could go out there and really play well in coverage and cover tight ends and be exactly what you want as a weak side linebacker in the scheme. And I think in an ideal world, Sean Weatherspoon gets 100% healthy and becomes Sean Weatherspoon of 2011, 2012, and is out there and he takes the middle linebacker role, and you got some athletic guys in the middle. But again, that's an ideal world.
Okay. All right, so this mock, we got different pathways to get there, but we both agree with the pick for slightly different reasons. But there you go, guys. That's our first 17 picks of the 2016 NFL Draft. And if you ask me next week, I'll probably have a different order and different picks. So that's the way it usually goes.
That's why I do 2 mock drafts a year, and I've actually cut it down to 1 this year.
There you go. All right. Let's jump into the rest of these mailbag questions. All right. Our first one comes from Falc Lover 69. If name still cracks me up. If you could hang out with one Falcon player for a day, who would it be?
Devontae Freeman, because I feel like he's the one guy that I could look eye to eye with and not feel small. And just be like, hey, dude, what's up? Let's hang out. All right. And he'd be cool. Apparently, he's like the coolest guy in the locker room. So, Devontae Freeman all day.
Okay. I'm trying to think of the non-obvious choice that I'm going to go with. But I'm just going to go. I'm going to pick Jonathan Babineau. He's my guy, so I'll hang out with Jonathan Babineau. We'll just chill. We might smoke a little something. And just hang out and listen to some UGK or something like that. So,
I mean, if you're looking for other guys on the roster that I feel like would be fun to hang out with, Vic Beasley, Grady Jarrett, I feel like you got to hang out with both of them at the same time. I feel like Trufant and Alford hanging out with them together would probably be insane. I feel like if you got to hang out with Julio, you got to bring Roddy along somehow. Because until Roddy signs with someone else, he's still a Falcon. And I hate to say this, but I don't think he's signing with anybody else.
I think he'll get a shot, but I don't think we're going to hear anything till like June or July.
And it'll be like, Roddy signed with the Patriots. Roddy got tired of the Patriots. Roddy retired.
That's what happened to Reggie Wayne last year. So, yeah, I could see that happening. All right. Evan Birchfield, the ideal man behind the mock draft, asks, on your list of important days of the year, where does the draft rank?
Somewhere between 1 and 0. Like, it's the most important day of the year for me.
Okay.
Until the Falcons somehow make it to a Super Bowl, yeah. It's the most important day of the year.
I don't know if it's the most important day of the year, but I do enjoy that Thursday night. Now that this is the 3-day format, I really get excited about it. And I got excited before it went to 3 days, but it's just watching it in prime time and all that stuff. I get swept up in it. So it's certainly in the top 5. I don't know if it beats Thanksgiving Day meal because that's the best eating of the year. I don't know if I which I think I would probably take Thanksgiving over the draft, but I know for other people they hate their family, so that would be a terrible idea. I don't have that problem.
Yeah, I don't hate my family, but I prefer to spend my Thanksgivings with other people's families.
There you go. All right. Falcons ATP asks, this is directed at me, why you hate Lord Sanu so much? I don't hate him. I I'm critical of him because I don't think he's that good. I think, people, see those workout videos online and they think, oh man, he's working so hard and he's so, he's getting after it. And it's like, he's not doing anything that anybody else is doing. The only difference is he's putting it online, and you guys are eating that stuff up, as gullible as you guys are. And he makes these one-handed grabs and you're like, he could have easily caught 700 passes and dropped 699 of them. But the one-handed grab he caught, he put on the video, and you guys think, oh man, that's amazing. That's like, whatever. I think he's an ordinary player. I think he's a backup caliber talent. I think he got overpaid. I don't think he's going to do great things. I think he'll be productive because, I think there's a big myth out there that, a number 2 receiver can't be productive in Kyle Shanahan's offense, which was an excuse for why Roddy White had dropped off, but it really wasn't. Like, in 7 games, Leonard Hankerson was on pace to finish the year with like 60 catches for like 800 yards and 7 touchdowns if he had played out the whole season. And if I told you Mohamed Sanu was going to catch 60 passes for 800 yards and 7 touchdowns, everybody would probably sit there and go, oh man, that's awesome. That's great. And Leonard Hankerson could do that. And you guys, for most part, all think Leonard Hankerson's terrible. And it's like, he's okay. And people will be like, hey, stop hating on the guy, give him a chance and whatever. But he's okay. He's fine. If you like average receivers that can't get open and drop passes and can't stretch defense. And, but hey, he puts great videos online. So.
All right, you're putting me to sleep with your Sanu hate. I'm just so numb to it at this point.
All right.
Like, all right, you hate him. We get it. Let's just move on.
I don't hate him.
Before he's played a snap for the Falcons, like, let's just let him play a couple snaps before we're like, no, fuck that guy. Like, that's all I'm saying.
I'm not
like
saying
real,
fuck that guy.
like,
I'm saying, like, he's not good. And like, I'm not going to pretend that he's good just because he's a Falcon. Like,
I'm not saying he's great. Don't get me wrong, but like, give the man a chance. At least see, maybe, just maybe, working with Matt Ryan is what he needed to go to the next level. Maybe having a guy like Julio Jones across from him. I mean, as good as AJ Green is, I think it's safe to say Julio Jones is a good bit better. Having Julio Jones across from him might be what he needs to take that next step. Maybe. I'm not saying it is, but maybe. Maybe he's a better fit for what Kyle Shanahan wants his wide receivers to do than what the other guy wanted his wide receivers to do, and what Hugh Jackson did. Maybe. Because Hugh Jackson got promoted to offensive coordinator this past year, and Sanu's snaps went down tremendously. I don't think that's coincidence.
Well, actually, Hugh Jackson was the offensive coordinator in 2014 as well.
Oh, was he? Well,
yeah, that was his first year.
But his role did change, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
So
I don't think Hugh Jackson's an idiot. I think he used Sanu to the best of his ability.
I don't think Hugh Jackson's an idiot either. I just don't think that Hugh Jackson knows how to work in 12 different receiving threats like what he had up there. He had a lot of different guys he could work up there. He actually had a good tight end. The Falcons don't. I like Tammy. Tammy's solid, but so.
All right. Well, when he's not good, don't come crying to me.
I don't think he's gonna be a world beater, but I think he'll be like what Roddy White was in 2013, which is solid. It's not top 10 Roddy. That's like, all right, well, Roddy's winding down, Roddy.
Okay. All right. I'll let it go. Okay, Noah Williams asks, how do you feel about Charles Tapper for the Falcons a little later in the draft?
I don't like his fit in Atlanta. I know that's going to sound a little crazy, but like, he's a 6 foot tall, 270 pound, like outside linebacker. I don't really love his fit in Atlanta. I don't think he's got the athleticism to really bend the edge often. I think his best fit might be at 3-4 outside linebacker, though, where he could play in a standing 9 so that he could just kind of bust off the snap and destroy a tackle that way. I'm not a huge. I like Charles Tapper. I don't like his fit in Atlanta.
Okay. I like Charles Tapper. I don't know how good a pro he'll be. I think he has upside, but he might be one of those players that's always gonna like. I guess the player he kind of reminds me of is Jeremy Mincey, who was always a talented guy, but never really put it together. Had that one good year in Dallas where I think he got like 8 sacks, and then outside that, he's just been kind of average. I think Tapper might be that type of player. Like, he might have one really good year, but for the most part, you'll be kind of underwhelmed with him. But I do think he can sort of play the same role that people sort of envision Shaq Lawson playing in the defense. Obviously, I don't think he'll be as good, but I do feel like he can play that base Leo. I think he was kind of miscast in Oklahoma because they asked him to bulk up and be this 3-4 defensive end, where he was really more of a speed outside guy. And I think if you sort of get him, at 270 or whatever he is, and sort of ask him to use his speed on the edge, I think he can be beneficial. And, it'll be great when we play the Raiders because he can chase down Amari Cooper like he did in the Sugar Bowl a couple of years ago from like 60 yards downfield. So, that'll help shut down Amari Cooper when, Desmond Trufant isn't doing it. So I'm kidding, guys. Next question comes from Cookie by Nature, our boy Devontae. He says, how would you feel if the Falcons double dipped in the safety department in the first 2 rounds?
I don't know how much I'd like that. I don't see 2 rounds worth of safeties. I know Aaron would be like, yeah, take Keanu Neal and Carl Joseph. And I like Carl Joseph. I don't know if Carl Joseph is worth a first 2-round pick based on his injuries. Just based on his injuries. I don't know if I would take him. Because it's not just like the one injury that he had. He had multiple injury issues. So, I mean, like Jeremy Cash, kind of, not really. Darian Thompson, I like Thompson, but I don't know if he's a great fit for a role that's not strong safety. Like, I like Sean Davis. I like Justin Simmons. Honestly, the one guy that I would love to see Atlanta get is just out of all of them, if they had to get a safety and double dip on a safety, maybe not in the first 2 rounds, but say like 1 and 3. If you're getting that long-term free safety, Simmons would be a perfect fit. He's that 6'2", can cover deep, has great agility numbers. Maybe not the best straight line speed, but I kind of liken him to a Jarris Bird with a little bit more range in terms of like what kind of safety, what kind of role you'd want him to play. That deep third, and then he's just a long, tall guy.
Yeah. People probably know that I'm a big fan of Carl Joseph. I think he's the best safety prospect in the last 5 years. He's the best safety I've evaluated since Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas came out in 2010. I don't really consider
Ramsey.
I don't consider. I don't really see Ramsey as a true safety. I kind of evaluate him more as a deep, like kind of like the Honey Badger. They say he's a safety, but he's kind of more of he's just a DB.
That's fair.
So, like, I understand people's trepidation with Joseph because that is something I am concerned about. I think safety is the most injury-prone position, certainly on the defense. And when you play the way that Carl Joseph plays, which is I'm going to bring the hammer on people, you're not that big, you're going to be susceptible to injury. I think Joseph, but again, I think Joseph is so good that I would be willing to take the risk on it. I wouldn't probably do it in round 1, but if he's there in round 2 at pick 50 or whatever, I'd snatch him up and wouldn't hesitate. I'd be like, yeah, it's a gamble, But if he pans out, it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to this defense. Like, I think second only to Miles Jack, a healthy Carl Joseph makes the biggest possible impact on this defense than any other player in this draft class.
I think when you have 5 picks, you can't take a gamble like Carl Joseph.
Okay. I don't begrudge you. And there are other free safeties I like. I don't think any of them are anywhere close to Joseph's upside, but I do feel like, as you mentioned, Justin Simmons would be I wouldn't complain one bit if we drafted him. I like Darian Thompson. I like Keanu Neal. I don't really see any of these guys being a first round pick, but like I could talk myself into Keanu Neal, especially if we traded back. I don't necessarily know at 17, but I wouldn't be jumping off bridges or anything like that if we took him at 17. Especially if the plan was to come back in round 2 and get a guy like Simmons or Joseph or Thompson. So I wouldn't have a problem with the safety double dipping on safeties in the first 2 rounds. I would rather see that happen than double dipping on linebackers, because I think there's probably like 5 or 6 safeties in this draft that are better than some of these linebackers that people have us taking that high. But I don't hate the linebackers. I just think they're kind of being overdrafted because it's not a good linebacker class.
I think you're completely right there. It's just not a good linebacker class, so they're going to get way overdrafted.
Yeah, it's a bunch of guys. Like, I think pretty much every linebacker outside of Miles Jack, and obviously Jalen Smith, because no one knows what his situation is. Pretty much every linebacker is probably where they get drafted is probably going to be around earlier than when they should, or at least half around, 15 picks earlier than where they should get drafted. So that's how I sort of feel about the linebacker class.
Which is fair.
Next question comes from Evan Birchfield. He says, what's your opinions on Cody Whitehair, who has a visit with us in the next week or so?
I'm going to be the dissenter on Cody Whitehair, just because I think, why is he going in the first round when Connor McGovern's a better football player? When Connor McGovern's a better athlete? I like Cody Whitehair. I just think McGovern's a better overall fit long term. If I'm the Falcons and McGovern's there in the 3rd round, I'd snatch him up in a heartbeat. Play him at right guard and have a guy right next to Mack, right next to Schrader, who I know could destroy people off the line and has a nasty attitude and definitely has the ability to run the way that you want your guys in that zone blocking scheme to run. So
okay. I do like Whitehair a lot. I certainly like him a lot more than you. The one concern I have with Whitehair is his bench press was a little concerning. I don't think it's a huge deal, but having been burned on the Peter Kahn's pick, it does give me a little bit more pause than it probably normally would, just because I'm like, he doesn't play like a guy who lacks core strength, but when you bench as little as what he did, I think he did 16 reps, which I think is like in like the 2nd percentile among offensive linemen. That's pretty bad. Like, you got to get to like 20, dude. And he doesn't have like 36-inch arms to blame on not benching that much. So I'm just gonna say my excuse is gonna be the Kansas State strength training program is terrible. But I do think he's the one. I think he's I think I might be confusing McGovern and Westerman a little bit, just because they both have Christian and Connor and long last names, but I don't see them being on the same plane as Whitehair as players. I think Whitehair would be
from Missouri.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to, in my brain, I'm trying to picture what I remember seeing them, and I might be blending the two of the guys into the same thing. I didn't see McGovern as being a second-round talent if I'm getting my mental Rolodex of tape study correct in my head. I saw him more as like a fourth-round talent sort of guy. I think Whitehair is a legit top 50 talent. I think he was very good at Kansas State. I think he would be a perfect scheme fit. And I think, he might not be able to come in right in day one and start right away and give you great snaps. I don't think he's on the same plane as Batonio or Zach Martin that were in Kevin Zeitler, some recent interior guards that came in day one and were very good. I don't think he's that guy, but I think it's a perfect situation for the Falcons because I think Levitre is going to be here for 1 year and then you're going to replace him. And I think you can plug in Whitehair immediately beside Jake Matthews, and your left side is secure, hopefully for the next 7 to 10 years. So I would be a fan of the Whitehair pick if we took him. I don't necessarily would love it at pick 17. It's a little bit of a reach for me, but if he's there at pick 50, I'm not going to complain at all. Okay, our next question is another one from Evan Birchfield. He says, Cravens, as in Sua, is visiting us. We got two Sua Cravens questions. First one's from Evan Birchfield. He says, Sua Cravens is visiting us. How would he fit in our scheme? And Brosif929 says, what do you think about Sua Cravens?
I think in a vacuum, he's a high second-round talent. I think when you look at the Falcons scheme, he's probably a strong safety in base, and then he moves down to a linebacker role in the nickel. I think he's one of those guys that, as Aaron likes to say, if you've got too much versatility, you've got no versatility. He might be one of those guys that has no true versatility, no true spot, at least when it comes to the Falcon scheme. I think his ideal role is like a Tampa 2 weak side linebacker.
Yeah. Cravens is fine. I've never been a big fan of him because I remember he was one of those guys that we had talked about early on the show. I think we did a show in September with Charles, and we talked about Cravens, and then people were asking us about him later in the season. I've always sort of seen him as a strong safety fit. Some of the issues I have with Cravens are some of the same issues I have with Darren Lee. I think the linebacker position, people underestimate how physical a spot it is to at least be a high-level linebacker. I think there's plenty of guys that aren't very physical that start in the NFL. Paul Warlow. And
that's athletic.
Okay. And if you're fine with average play, then you can put a guy like Cravens or Darren Lee at line as a full-time linebacker and be happy with that. And especially if you really like what they give you in sub packages. And I think that's really where their value is, and not necessarily as an every down player. I think Cravens, one of the issues I've had, I don't think he's a very physical player, so I don't really see him fitting as an every down difference maker at linebacker. I was a little surprised with how poorly he tested at the combine. I think he did a little bit better in his pro day. I know I'd have to go back and recheck the numbers, but he's okay. I think he would be same thing with Darren Lee. He'd be a strong safety. He'd be limited in coverage a little bit. I think he has a little bit more upside in coverage to get better there. He wasn't really asked to do a ton there. But I think he could, cover tight ends and do that sort of thing to a level of competency. If we took him in round 2, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. I don't think he's not going to, at least in Atlanta, in the other teams it might be different. He'll fit differently. But in Atlanta, I don't feel like we're going to draft Sua Cravens and be like, oh man, we got this stud. We got a guy. He can start and be functional and decent. And
that's more what they had there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's all right. He's fine. He's not bad. He doesn't make me do backflips or anything like that. All right. Our next question comes from Evan Birchfield. He says, if we did trade out of 17, who who are some of the teams you would think we would want to move? Who are the team? Grammar is not my strong suit. Who are some of the teams you would think would want to move up to our spot?
Ain't nobody moving up to 17. But like, if there's anybody, it's gonna be the Rams because they say, you know what, we got 2 second-round picks. Let's get a first-round talent for the defensive line, like Sheldon Rankins that fell, and have Rankins and Donald on passing downs. And then let's trade up for a quarterback like Paxton Lynch. But they're not going to trade up to 17. They're going to take their 2 second-round picks, trade up to or take like a second and a third, trade up to 22, and get Paxton Lynch that way. That's what I would do if I was them.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you're hoping for a trade up, I think you're really sort of binging on the Jets not working out a deal with Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I think Paxton Lynch would be a real good fit in that Chan Gailey offense. And someone wants to trade up to jump ahead of the Jets and get Paxton Lynch if he's still on the board. I think maybe there's probably going to be a run of wide receivers at the top 1 to 20s pick because you got teams like Cincinnati, you got teams like Minnesota, you got Houston. You know, they all could be looking at wide receiver with their first round pick. And if someone picking after them is looking at it and saying, we want to get our guy and we're not sure he's going to be there when we pick later, let's move up and jump ahead of those teams and take a wide receiver, whoever they think is the top guy. I think the other option is if we see a bunch of tackles go before the Falcons pick and there's a mini run and someone's going to be like, we got to get our guy. You know, like in the scenario I had where Stanley and Conklin and Decker are all there, and someone's like, Jason Spriggs not going to fall. Like if Carolina is like, oh, we really want Jason Spriggs, or Denver, you know, Carolina's probably not going to trade with the Falcons. But, you know, someone's like, Jason Spriggs the only guy that's left, and we really need a left tackle. Let's go get him. Or like Seattle makes sense because they have horrible offensive tackles. So those are sort of the realistic trades I sort of see for the Falcons. But it's one of those situations where I hope the Falcons can trade back and pick up some picks, but I'm not going to sit here and be like, it's definitely going to happen because it really just depends on who's available. And, you know, there might be a surprise guy that slips in the draft and someone's going to be like, oh, this guy's falling, let's go get him. Or it might not be. So, yeah. Okay, D-Rock the Party asks, why is Lee predicted for the first and Jones for the second when they are about the same? Shouldn't Lee go in the second?
I mean, I would think Deion Jones should go in the third and Lee should go in like the late first. But if we're talking about like actual how this draft is going to work, it's like that because this draft is a weak-ass draft. Just a weak draft.
I don't really believe in the notion of a weak draft. I wrote about that in my takeaways columns. People can go check that out on Falcons.com. But I understand why you say that. I think if you like I think Darren Lee's better than Deion Jones, but I think if you're projecting them in Atlanta both as weak side linebackers, I don't think the gap is that big. Because I think really what they're both bringing to the table is speed, and they're not going to be great run defenders. And I think Lee might be slightly better in coverage right now, and I think probably the difference is Lee probably has more upside in coverage than Jones does, but I don't think it's enough to really sort of make one a top 20 pick and the other guy, you know, barely in the top 50. And so that's part of the reason why I'm kind of like, I don't get why people are hyping up Darren Lee as a great pick at 17 for the Falcons. Yeah, you know, like as I was saying earlier, I think if you really like Darren Lee, I think it's for two reasons. I think it's either you see him as a Dion Buchanan-esque chess piece that you can move around and really utilize in your nickel and dime packages. Because, or, you really think he has the potential to be a great coverage linebacker in the future, and you think there's going to be a time 3 or 4 years from now where you're going to be able to put him on an island against a Greg Olsen or a Rob Gronkowski, and not to say that he can shut those guys down, but he can hold his own. I mean, that's basically what Danny Trevathan was. He didn't shut down Rob Gronkowski in the playoffs. He got beat by Rob Gronkowski a bunch of times, but he held his own. And it'll freed up the Broncos to do a lot of other things defensively because they didn't have to scheme so much of their defense around stopping Rob Gronkowski. And I think if you like Darren Lee as that type of guy, potentially that's why you really like him. I don't think he's that guy today. I don't think he's going to come in and do dick against Greg Olsen in 2016, but I could see him doing some real stuff to him, 2 or 3 years from now. So I know where you're going, D-Rock, and I kind of agree with you. I don't think there's whole lot of separating. I don't see Deion Jones as being that type of guy. I think Deion Jones' trait is he's fast, and that's really about it. I'm not a big fan of LSU linebackers. I've been burned by these guys so many times.
Lee has a lot more instincts than Deion Jones.
It's fair. I'll go with you on that. Yeah, by and large, if you play anything other than safety or defensive back or defensive lineman for LSU or running back, you're probably not going to be good. Offensive line, I guess I'll give a couple of Whitworth, I guess is fine. You're probably not going to be good in the NFL. They have a bad history of producing NFL talent. I don't know. It's just I shouldn't prejudge guys just from the school they come from, but it's one of those things where
since Les Miles got there.
Yeah, it's just like their guys just don't live up to they're great college football players. They're the best team getting off the bus athletically in any program in the country. But a lot of their guys, when they get to the NFL, they're okay. I'm not saying they're terrible or anything. Just they're all right. So I don't hold LSU guys. You got to be like I like Michael Brockers a couple of years ago, and he's turned out pretty good, but. You got to be something extra, and I don't think Deion Jones is that guy. All right, we got another one from D-Rock. He asks, would Ragland only be considered a potential second-round player if he'd gone anywhere besides Bama?
I mean, I consider him a fringe first-round talent with a 30 grade right now, so yeah, you could say that. He's a late 1, early 2 right now, having gone to Bama. If he had gone to, say, I don't know, South Carolina, he's probably a mid 2. There is the Bama thought process around him that does kind of hype people up, even if they don't really want to admit it.
Yeah. I mean, look, he was the leader on the national championship defense that was known for their defense. So he's going to get a boost in his draft stock because some people consider him to be the best player in that defense. So you're right. If he went to Missouri or Louisville, would he be being, at least he might, I don't know where he's going to get drafted. I think he'll probably go somewhere in the late first. I think I had him going to Kansas City in my last mock at 27. So I think he'll go somewhere around there. And I don't think that's, where if he winds up going that late, him going to a different school probably wouldn't have changed anything. But, early on in his process, he was being talked about as a top 12, top 15 pick. And I don't think he would have ever been talked about that if he hadn't gone to Alabama. So, yeah. All right. The Falcon Y asks, does O'Brien Schofield come back to the Falcons before or after the draft or not at all?
I'm going to go with not at all.
Yeah. I got nothing else to add. Them signing Courtney Upshaw pretty much nixed that. He's not coming back. I wish he was, but he's not coming back.
I mean, unless he can play Mike and replace Warlow, then like I'm cool with it. But because I mean, I like Upshaw; he's a leader. But I mean, let's look at Leo. Where's his spot in the Leo? All right, in the base defense, where's his spot in base? It's not a strong side defensive end. It's not at Leo because Upshaw and Claiborne are there. It's not a strong side linebacker because Reed and Beasley are there. It's not in the sub package. You got Beasley and Claiborne and Shelby and Jared as a defensive line. I mean, like, I'm not seeing his spot.
Yeah, I think Schofield would be a better Leo in the base defense than Upshaw or Claiborne would be, just because I think he's not as good as a run defender as Upshaw is, but he's a better pass rusher, and he's probably not as good as a pass rusher as Claiborne is, but he's a better run defender. So he's kind of like a balance between the two. But it is what it is. I think the Falcons have moved on. They had their price point for him. I think Schofield went a little bit more than that. And unless he's basically going to come down below what his price point was, probably what they had him at, it's not going to happen. So he should get a decent offer from somebody else, the Cowboys or Titans or whoever was interested in him, and he'll be playing for them next year. I wish him the best. I hope he does well, but I don't think it's going to be in Atlanta.
I agree.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions we have. So we appreciate you guys hanging in there with us, sifting through our long mock draft explanations. I know that probably took a little longer than you guys had hoped. You're like, just hurry up and get to the Falcons pick. But, Scott and I like to talk these things through. And I hope we gave you guys some pretty good analysis on sort of team needs and sort of, I think Scott went more for looking at teams' biggest needs. I kind of went more, BPA for some of these picks. So you get two different perspectives on it, and we'll see how it goes. If you guys want to have a suggestion for what we might do for next week's show, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. If you have questions or whatever, suggestions, comments, whatever, we will check those out. You can send your tweets to myself. I am at Falcons. You can send them to Scott at Karasik S. You can use the show's Twitter handle, which is Falcons PFC. Rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe on iTunes. Check us out on ProFootballCentral.com. We're still posting those over there. And we'll be back next week to talk more draft. If anything happens with the Falcons, we'll talk about that. But, we're looking for ideas like Evan had this week to sort of, fill up airtime other than just answering. There's nothing really new to talk about. So other than answering your guys' mailbag questions. So we'll be looking forward to that. And if you have any of those, shoot us those our way, and we'll be back.
And one thing before we leave, next week we're going to be doing these shows at about 7.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'll be changing the time to 7 p.m. I think it's a better fit for our schedules. So if you got used to watching us at about 10 o'clock, it's not a problem. You can still watch it. It'll still be on the YouTube archive at 10 o'clock. It's just we'll be able to get the product out there a little bit easier. And I think it'll be easier I know my schedule personally, because the last 30 minutes, I was kind of dozing there. So I think for show quality, we're going to be moving it up a couple hours.
Yeah, it's 1 a.m. on the East Coast. So I know if you guys stayed up, we really appreciate you guys' hardcore fandom if you stayed up to 1 a.m. to watch us. So we'll move up the time, and that'll probably be the time moving forward. And there you go.
All right.